All right, court in South Carolina and Walterboro in the Low Country is now in recess for about eight or so, 7 minutes from now. They'll get back underway and the defense will continue its closing arguments. This is the final step for the jury hearing from the defense team before the case will be handed to the jury, and they will head to the jury room and they will then begin deliberations. We heard from the prosecution yesterday. That took about 3.5 hours. The defense is about an hour into closing arguments now. It could take another hour once Jim Griffin, the attorney for the defense team, gets back in front of the jury. We'll bring that to you. But let's talk more about what we have heard so far. With that, I will welcome in legal analyst and attorney Mark Reichel, trial attorney Misty Maris, and retired FBI agent Robert Dreek. Thank you, all three of you, for being here. As you've been listening, as I have and people at home have, I'm interested in how you think the defense is doing here. Misty, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Jim Griffin seems a little off today, I must say. He seems a bit low energy, like he's kind of searching for what he's talking about. I'm not sure what that is. Perhaps it's just exhaustion. We've seen him really feisty in cross-examinations, direct examinations, and he seems like a deflated balloon. But that being said, he is hitting some of the substantive points. I think he's missing the opportunity to hit them a bit harder. But specifically, the failures of the SLED investigation, incredibly important to the defense. SLED blew it at every level. The witnesses confirmed this on the stand, that protocol was not followed. And the point he's making is that SLED's failures ultimately resulted in there being exculpatory evidence that should have been a part of this case that is not, because of their failures at the crime scene and all of the mistakes that they made. So I think that's really important, but I'm not sure how effectively he is getting that point across this morning. I'm hoping maybe later in the day he'll pick it up a little bit.
Right, so they're trying to plant that seed of reasonable doubt with the jury. Robin, let me bring you in on the investigative side of this and the gathering of evidence. So a couple of things that the defense pointed out. There were tire tracks the night of the murders happened. They didn't really secure that. They didn't take the proper evidence. He also said there was hair in Maggie's hands, and I've been watching this thing day in and day out. That was the first time I had heard that, and the hair hadn't been tested. They didn't take DNA from Maggie or Paul. Are those basic investigative steps that should have happened that didn't?
Yeah, no doubt. There's lots of failure on the investigative side on this, and you highlighted right there, Marnie, really well when they mentioned the hair in Maggie's hands. And actually, Alec, for the first time during the entire defense, he was actually starting to wring his hands and try to clear them non-verbally when that topic came up. What I find really fascinating, though, is their use of his drug addiction as a plausible defense to rational behavior, because they're saying rational people don't commit murders to deflect from themselves, yet he's a drug addict, which is completely irrational behavior that coincides with that. So I find the entire defense interesting that they're using that irrational behavior to say rational people don't commit murder.
Right. And I think, Mark, let's bring you in here because it speaks to the lie. And I've called it the big lie, because until this trial happened, no one, including apparently Alex Murdaugh's attorneys, knew that he lied about the Snapchat video that puts him at the crime scene within minutes of the murders. And you heard Jim Griffin there say moments ago, we're left with the lie. He said, why did he lie? That's certainly a fair question as he addresses the jury. He said, frankly, I wouldn't be sitting here or over there next to my client if he hadn't lied. I'm wondering how that helps the defense in the eyes of the jury.
He has to do it. It's a fact that will not go away. And so what he was doing was really getting some candor, some familiarity with the jury. So he's no longer an outsider. Like Missy described earlier, he was very aggressive throughout the trial. So by acknowledging this, he becomes one with the jury. He had to do it. He had to do it. I've actually done that before. I had a client who was acquitted, who I said in closing argument, he lied when he didn't even have to. But the science, the facts prove that he didn't do the crime. And I think that's what they're going to go with here. If you ask me, motive is really big. Motive overrides everything else on why we would do something. It has to be so strong we would discard and override consequences here. I just don't see a motive. So I think, this is not the question you're asking me, but my prediction is the jury is going to take door number 3. I think there's going to be a mistrial in this case. I don't think they're ever going to come to a guilt or innocence in this.
So you think the hung jury, you don't think the state, if it came to that, would retry it?
Well, they will retry after a hung jury in this case, believe me. This is where they learn their errors, and they usually go about filling those holes up and fixing those errors. But I just see that the jury is going to say, look, 1, 2, or 3, and they're going to take door number 3 at the end of a long period of deliberations. And they're going to say, I think we just can't come to a conclusion here.
Misty, I want to talk about what we heard from the prosecutor, Creighton Waters, yesterday in his closing arguments, because as we listen to the defense lay out their case for the jury, it'll be the last thing that the jury hears. But for people at home who have been watching it, he really leaned into the lie. And also, if he lied then about the biggest things in the case, initially when investigators are saying, what happened here? He didn't say, I was just with them. I just saw them. I can't believe 5 minutes later they were murdered. If he lied then, he's lying to you now. Don't let him fool you like he fooled Maggie and Paul. Was that a strong argument from the prosecutors? How did that land with you?
It is a strong argument because one of the tasks of the jury is to assess credibility, and they make a determination about whether they want to believe some, all, or none of someone's testimony. And so Alex Murdaugh, based on the lie, the most critical lie, we know that he's committed all these financial crimes. He admitted to that on the stand. We know he's a serial liar. But the big question is, well, does that make you a murderer? And so the prosecution is honing in on the lie that is directly relevant to this case. And quite frankly, the reason that the prosecution has a case is because we have this video. Alex Murdaugh lied. And so the question becomes, why lie? Why lie that night? Well, who's the person who knows when Maggie and Paul were murdered? The murderer, right? That night, that's the person who knows. And so his lie was because if he put himself at the scene, he would be caught. That's the whole point of the prosecution's case. And the prosecution did effectively use that, his testimony in conjunction with the evidence to talk about that credibility component. But they also did something else that I think makes it even stronger, which is they said, all right, let's pretend like Alex Murdaugh's story about that night is what the jury accepts. Let's use his version of the facts. Well, it still puts him at the murder scene within, a minute of when the prosecution's theory of time of death takes place. So they kind of hit it on both sides. Number one, he's lying. Why should you believe him now? He's been lying this whole time. Number two, even if you believe him, it's still not plausible or feasible for somebody else to swoop in this 4-minute time span and commit these murders.
Robin, another thing that I'm hung up on based on the evidence, and you heard Jim Griffin say to the jury, you will decide what the evidence is, but it's the clothes the night the murders happened, that Alec changed clothes at some point, and the prosecution pointed out, well, sometimes he remembers in great detail the events of a day or an event, but on this night, he can't remember when he changed clothes, if he changed clothes, but he also claims that he flipped over his son, Paul, to see if he had a pulse, and the prosecution said he would have had blood on him. Anybody would have had blood on him with the amount of blood. As you listen to the gruesomeness of this crime scene, what stands out to you about that piece of evidence? Could that be something the jury hangs their hat on?
I definitely think so. I think what we're really seeing here and what the jury is seeing, which is hard to predict because we're not in the jury box with them, is a life of chaos. I mean, everything about this is chaotic and has been chaotic from the very beginning of trying to come up with a theory and a reason why someone would commit this murder if it was him, as well as this entire backstory of his life has been chaos. And so him not remembering things, now they're using his drug addiction as a possible reason for his behavior. I mean, they use that word rational. Rational people wouldn't do this. It's important to remember, though, it looks like this is not a very rational, healthy family situation, regardless of how well someone loves each other. I think that's a side.
All right, guys,
Rational
I'm going to jump
behavior.
in. I'm going to jump in real quick. Pardon the interruption, but I believe the
Sure.
jury is being reseated. Let's listen in to the judge.